Who could have imagined that something that happened in 1977 would result in a new vinyl LP in 2017? It all started when a young college professor was invited to compose the music for a film promoting the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. His task? Compose a tone poem for each of the 5 departments within RIT's School for American Craftsmen: wood, metal, weaving, glass, and clay. There's quite a story behind the scenes, so let's begin at the beginning, shall we? The young professor had just produced an LP of the student jazz ensemble he directed at Genesee Community College on a hilltop in farm country outside the small town of Batavia, New York. The ensemble was performing a concert for the local community. As luck would have it, which luck always does, a filmmaker from Chicago was in attendance. After the concert, she enthusiastically approached the young professor and asked if he would consider composing original music to accompany the aforementioned promotional film. "Love to," he answered simply.
I'm afraid there's a very limited budget, though. Actually, there's no budget.
As long as I can cover the cost of a few local musicians I know and some recording studio time, that's all we'll need.
Really? But what about your fee?
Hey, I do it for the love of composing and recording.
How soon could you do this?
I could start tomorrow, the hook already buried deep in his beard-covered chin.
I need a finished score delivered in 2 weeks. Is that even possible?
Sure. Want to grab lunch tomorrow to talk about it? So they met the next day, and she described the mood she envisioned for wood, metal, weaving, glass, and clay. They agreed on a minimalist budget to cover costs for the project. By that afternoon, she had begged the required approval from the dean, along with advance payment for the musicians and studio time, and they agreed to meet 2 weeks later, when the young professor would deliver the master tape of his finished score. Alas, he was soon to suffer a series of behind-the-scenes events that no one could have dreamed possible. Now for the story within the story. The smartest thing the young professor did was to call Jeff Resnick, a marvelously gifted trumpet player the professor had worked with several years prior. Resnick agreed to bring along 3 Eastman School of Music faculty bandmates: woodwind specialist Raymond Ricker, drummer Dave Mancini, and bassist Alec Brinkman. The professor's second call went to the great pianist Sonny Companak. The final call went to Tom Rizzo, an acclaimed Rochester guitarist who had worked with the professor in the recording studio. Of course, they all coveted studio work, as their collective music careers would demonstrate all too well. True to form, all agreed to a minimalist fee to accommodate the available budget. The next smart thing the professor did was to book a recording session at the $150 an hour recording studio in Rochester, where he had produced the college ensemble's album. Admittedly, completing even 1 tone poem in 8 hours was a stretch. But 5? That's all the budget would allow, so they would simply have to make do. With that in mind, the last smart thing he did was to compose the music the first week, sending the performance charts to the musicians in advance. He knew he didn't need to ask them to master the music beforehand. He had no doubt they would, and that turned out to be a lifesaver. The recording session was scheduled for a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. Naturally, all the musicians had gigs that night, so 5 o'clock was the latest they could stay. As with all his sessions, the professor arrived with sealed envelopes containing payment in full for the day's recording. No surprise, everybody showed up early, eager to get started on time. All except the recording engineer, that is. So they sat outside on the stoop, awaiting his arrival. 10 o'clock, no engineer. 11 o'clock, still no engineer. The professor was in a panic, pressured by the Monday due date of the completed master tape for the film. No cell phones in the 1970s, so dozens of phone calls were dialed from nearby telephone booths. You know, like in Superman movies? The engineer was nowhere to be found, and answering machine messages went unreturned. At noon, Jeff Resnick came running from his phone booth, waving his arms frantically, out of breath but smiling. "We're in luck. I just got a hold of Mick Gazowski. He got home this morning from a European concert tour. He has a key to the studio and he's on his way." "Man, no way he's gonna make it here before 1 o'clock, Dave bemoaned. "And we gotta be out of here by 5. They all looked at each other, and at the professor, and at the envelopes in their pockets. "I can stay till 7, maybe 7:30, Ray offered. They all looked at each other again, and at the professor, and at the envelopes in their pockets. They took a vote. Without exception, all agreed to stay and work until 8 o'clock, but that would have to be the limit. The professor smiled. "Thanks, guys." Mick arrived at 12:45, looking none the worse for wear, studio key in hand. The musicians filed in with their gear. Normally it takes the typical engineer hours to set up a studio for recording, but Mick was far from typical. He had everything ready to roll in 20 minutes, the professor marveling at his calm and cool demeanor despite his lack of sleep. "Glass" was the first tone poem they recorded. No rehearsal, one take, done. The creative juices flowing, Resnick assumed the duties of organizing everything from that point on, devising innovative solutions for all the tricky overdubs the professor's music required in order to make 7 players sound like a much bigger band. True to their promises, they managed to wrap up the session at 7:59 p.m., Mick and the professor remained until midnight to edit and master the score. As promised, the young professor handed the magical master tape to the filmmaker on Monday, then departed, assuming his professional obligation was complete. Not so fast. A week later, the professor answered his ringing phone. It was the filmmaker. Uh-oh, he thought to himself.
The dean loves the music. In fact, he wants to know if you can create 4 new tone poems for the School of Art and Design: painting, printmaking, foundations, and communications design. These would be added to the film already near completion.
Wow, that's great. Same approach as before? Same budget?
Well, there's no money available. I'm afraid we spent everything we had on the School for American Craftsmen project. Do you think you might,
He scratched his head, thought about it, and an idea came to him in mid-scratch. "You know," he mused, "I've got my own little project studio in a 9x11 space I rent for $50 a month in an old industrial warehouse in town. Nothing even close to a professional recording studio, but I've got an 8-track tape deck for multi-tracking, a small mixing board, a 2-track deck for mastering, and a synthesizer. So, if you're game, I've always wanted to jump into the one-man band genre. A real challenge for sure. So, yeah, I think I could give you exactly what you need."
Let's do it.
"Let me guess. You need it in 2 weeks, right?"
Well, I actually need it in 1 week. Can you do that?
"Yep, I can do that." The young professor spent the next week, day and night, in his little makeshift project studio in the Batavia Industrial Center. Of course, back in those days, there were no personal computers, no MIDI sequencers and the like, so he performed every part on every instrument himself. He persuaded another musician friend to play on 2 of the tracks. That musician was saxophonist Dick Griffo, a fellow alumnus from the University of Buffalo Music Department. He also invited one of his community college students, percussionist Mitch Grant, to join the fun on a track. Sure enough, the exhausted professor delivered his second master tape a week later. He had a good feeling that something good might come from all of this. Once again, he assumed he had fulfilled his obligation, and his search for a new project was already underway. The phone rang. Yes, it was the filmmaker. "Uh-oh, you didn't like it?" he asked.
like it. The dean loves it so much that he's decided he would like you to produce all 9 tone poems on a long play record album.
You're kidding, right?
He thinks an LP of your music scores would be a great recruiting tool for the School of American Craftsmen and School of Art and Design. They're going to mail copies to high school guidance counselors and promising students across the country. Europe too, I believe. What do you think about that?
I think the dean is a very wise man with a vision for the future. Okay, how's this going to work financially?
First, he insists that you register the music copyrights in your name to protect your legal rights. Second, you'll be given full credit for the music on the album cover, along with contact information for anyone who wants to reach you. RIT will pay for everything. The dean wants you to oversee the whole project to completion.
I can handle that. I hate to even ask, but when do you need it done?
Surprise! Take whatever time you need. The film is already doing its job, that's for sure, so the LP is just icing on the cake.
Speaking of the film, what kind of response are you getting?
To quote the dean, viewer response to the professor's innovative jazz fusion music has been immediate and overwhelming.
Count me in. I'll get everything rolling on my end. By the way, what are we going to use for the album cover?
The dean invited one of the faculty members in the School of Art and Design to design the cover, which will have 4-color artwork on both sides.
This is exciting stuff for sure. Thank you for involving me in such an innovative project. I really enjoyed it every step of the way.
All I can tell you is that the dean isn't easily satisfied. This is all happening because of your passion for your work.
6 months later, the LPs were mailed across the globe. In the meantime, the young professor left teaching, another story for another time, and opened a music production company in his 9x11 studio in the decrepit old industrial complex. With a film score to his credit, he ventured into advertising by composing and producing jingles for ad agencies. That little production company eventually morphed into a full-service national ad agency. Yet another story for another time and place. But before we conclude this story, the young professor has a confession to make. He is me, and I am him. But you already knew that, didn't you? Time for the final movement in this composition. Let's fast forward to 2003 and another phone call. Not from the filmmaker this time, but from my younger brother, Irv. Congratulations! For what? For selling your album on eBay for $185. What are you talking about? What album and what's eBay? You remember that album you produced for RIT all those years ago? Some record collector in Europe just sold his copy for $185. Can you believe that? And you haven't heard of eBay? It's an internet site where people around the world sell things to each other. You better do some research, old man. By the way, do you happen to have any of those LPs left? Yeah, I think I might have a few of them up in the attic. Send me one, will you? It might be worth quite a bit of money. Sure, I'll send you one. As soon as you pay me the $20 you owe me. Check's in the mail, bro. So's the album, bro. Phone call concluded with a chuckle. I could only wonder how that LP could have become a favorite of rare LP collectors around the globe, bought and sold who knows how many times, and for how much money. Yes, I did the required research, contacting the rare LP collectors who had been following my music for all those years, unbeknownst to me. When they heard I had a few unopened LPs in my attic, well, you can guess the rest.